Hi there, I'm Eshaan Mani, president of the iWRITE Youth Club, and today I am super excited to speak with professor and author Amy Noel Parks in the latest installment of the iWRITE exclusive author series. Ms. Parks is a professor of elementary education at Michigan State University and is also the author of The Quantum Weirdness of the Almost Kiss, Leah and Beckett's Abracadabra, and Summer of Brave. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. All right, let's jump into it. First question. Were you a bookworm as a kid? And what were some of your favorite reads?
I was a bookworm as a kid. The book that comes to mind first is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, which is I guess, contemporary fantasy, you would say now, and has that like perfect mix for me of science and math and magic all sort of woven together.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember reading that book. I think it was third or fourth grade in my English class. That was a
I'm
great
glad
book.
people are still reading it. It's definitely, I mean, it was old even when I read it as a child, and now it's really old.
But that's the mark of a good book. You keep
I
you
think
keep
so.
revisiting it, right? Yeah. I mean, we've been reading Shakespeare for nearly what 400 years.
Yeah, at least.
And how do you think your childhood has shaped your writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, definitely like setting. So all of my books are set in the Midwest, which is where I grew up. And I think, I mean, it's a small thing, but so many books I read growing up were set either in California or in New York, and just like didn't quite feel like how I experienced my own childhood. So that's a big part of it. The other thing that I think, especially because of the time when I grew up, I think kids were just middle class kids were a lot more independent then, like sort of notoriously Gen Xers were left on our own growing up. And so I think a lot of the books I write, like kids are like really independent and maybe in ways that are less typical now, but makes for easier stories, I guess.
Sure, yeah. And the Midwest is interesting too because so one thing that I write, the organization is doing this year, our contest was all about Texas stories. Our writing
Oh,
contest was all about stories pertaining to Texas. It doesn't have to even be, you don't have to be from Texas to write a Texas story. So what to you is super interesting about the Midwest setting?
um, that's an interesting question. There's certainly something about the geography, so the like presence of the Great Lakes and smaller lakes, and the ways that even for people who live in cities, I grew up in Milwaukee, the natural world sort of integrates into your life. The other thing is, I think that because cities are a little like smaller and more navigable than in other parts of the country, like kids have like more free range over them. And then, of course, like the food. So I grew up in Wisconsin where frozen custard, which is like the most miraculous kind of ice cream, was created. So I always like tucking little bits of like my favorite Midwestern foods into the books.
Amazing. And what would you say your mission or your goal is as a writer?
Mission or goal? I mean, I write primarily to entertain. Um, I like books that are funny. I like books that make people happy. Sometimes, like working in schools, like right now, can be hard and emotionally challenging. Both kids and teachers are dealing with a lot right now. And so I really need, for me, my fiction to be a place where I escape and like everything is bright and happy. So like certainly like there are some big ideas that I take up. Like I'm very interested in girls in STEM and how we support them and make them feel welcome there. But it's not the primary driving force
Sure.
for me. Like I write escapism and I do that on purpose.
And we do need that now, especially more than any other time. And I know you mentioned that you're a professor. So how has your job, at MSU, how has it impacted, helped, shaped your fiction writing?
I think in a couple of ways. First, I do a lot of my work in math education. So I work with a lot of students who want to be teachers and who are afraid of math or they don't like math because they've had like really terrible experiences growing up. And that definitely made me want to write books about girls, especially who love math and see the beauty in it, and sort of present that other image and maybe make it more welcoming because it comes in like as a romance. Um, But then also, like, my fiction career has shaped my work at Michigan State. So since I started publishing, I now teach classes in children's literature, and that is like such delight to like just be able to like read books that are coming out now and talk with people about them. It's one of those moments where I can't believe like it's my job and I get paid for it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And are there any skills you employ in helping your students with writing, or with education that you've used in writing your fiction books?
They've used in writing my fiction books. I mean, I think I tell a lot of stories about schools in my fiction books that I hear from people who are like living in schools right now. But if anything, maybe it's gone in the other direction. So, like in this children's literature course that I teach, I supported my college students in doing a little fiction writing of their own, because I think you teach books differently if you've sort of lived inside them and thought about like how hard it is, even like to construct a picture book, which is not something I write, but like when I have my students sit down and think about how do you tell a story in 450 words, I think they have a lot more respect for the form than they did before they tried to do it.
Yeah, I guess dabbling in it or just trying one thing can give you a new
Yeah,
like new understanding for it. Huh,
I think so.
cool. And I know a lot of the books that you write have a romantic angle, kind of a rom-com kind of angle to it. I mean, rom-coms, there's a sort of image of them being as like light reading kind of pieces. So what do you think the value of the genre is, and do you think that's something that needs to be challenged, that kind of perception?
I do. I am the biggest advocate for including romantic comedies both in high school reading lists and also in like children's literature courses in college. Um, I mean, so, I said, yes, I write escapism and I do. And I think people should read happy books. But also, I think negotiating romantic relationships is a really huge part of human beings' lives, right? And certainly, like for young people, like with my middle grades, people who are doing it for the first time, and even in high school where maybe you haven't had a ton of experience, reading books where people are doing that is a way of thinking all that through and thinking through what you want and how to have conversations and how to make decisions. And I think that like most people are much more likely to be making decisions about their romantic lives than to like be leading revolutions or whatever. So like like or like with Shakespeare, like the idea that like what we should be reading is about like kings or generals or whatever. I don't actually think that like that's the most meaningful conversations that we can be having as human beings and certainly as young people.
Sure, right. I think even the realism within that, right? The realism within the escapism can be really valuable.
Yeah.
And what do you think is the hardest part of writing kind of rom-com novels, or the genre that you would say you write?
I mean, for me, uh, well, so for me, the hardest part is I tend to run away from conflict, like both in my own life and in my writing.
I can
And
I can empathize.
yeah, like if it were me, I would write 350 pages of just people like being happy and flirting all the time. But it turns out like that's boring if it's a whole book. So, like trying to figure out like what is the right level of conflict for a rom-com, right? Because if you go too big, then it's not fun anymore. And like you see that sometimes where people react to stories and they're just like, I do not like this person. Like, I don't want these two people to be together. They are not good for each other. And for me, that's when like the dial has been turned up a little too high on the conflict. But if you turn it down too low, then there's no tension there. So it's like finding that sweet spot in it.
Yeah, the right
Uh,
level of spice.
yeah, that I find challenging. Um,
And
but
how do you think that you've grown from your first book to now?
Oh, so much. I mean, so one of the things I did actually, even though I am a professor and I have a PhD, is I went back to school. So I'm in a MFA, a Master of Fine Arts program right now, where I'm studying writing for young people. And like that has been such a treat for me, like at my age and at the stage in my career, to go back and sort of be novice at something and spend time really thinking and learning. And in terms of how I've improved, I think I don't know, there are two things that stand out for me. One is really on this very small, like sentence level. I tend to think in terms of words and not images. And I think I've attuned myself more carefully to capturing images and to describing them, and to really be thinking about how readers are going to be seeing scenes as I present them on the page. And then the other thing is, I think I've gotten a little bit more adventurous in terms of plot. So my first two books, Quantum Awareness of the Almost Kiss and Summer of Brave, are, I would say, very quiet. They're very relationship driven, character driven books, and I love them. But my book coming out in July, Leah and Beckett's Abracadabra, and my next middle grade that I can't talk about yet that are coming out, both have I would say bigger, splashier, more exciting plots. And that was not something I felt capable of doing 2 or 3 years ago.
Hmm, how cool. I also assume that a large part of the audience for your books, considering the rom-coms, the middle grade level, it's more young girls. So, what's a message that you want to push out to your audience?
Mm. Well, like I said, I am very concerned with girls and women in STEM. And so I'm constantly trying to help girls think through what it's like to exist in that space, because even now it can be challenging. And so I want that there. And then the other thing I think that I spend a lot of time thinking about is that um, like especially girls in STEM, there's a space for all kinds of girls. So I think that sometimes like we like set up these lines of, well, girly girls do these things and they like these things, and I really want to write characters who like dressing up and they like makeup and they also like calculus, and that it is like possible and even joyful to like do both those things.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. I think breaking down those barriers, the sort of the preconceptions that we have is really important. And just to close, last question: what's your advice to any up and coming authors, any young kiddos just getting into the field?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is to read. That's like definitely how I learned to write. I think that like you just intuitively build a sense of story structure that way, especially if you're reading the kinds of books that you love to read. You will start to naturally tell stories in that format. And then I guess the second thing is to write. Like, and this is true about math too. Like all the things that we want to do, we get better at them as we practice, and we if we don't do them, we don't get better at them. And so you have to sort of be willing to go through a stage where you're bad at something before you can get to be better at something. And I think that can be hard. Like it can be frustrating to like not be achieving the thing that you want to achieve, but you really have to see it as like part of that developmental process.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been such fun.
My pleasure.
Alrighty, folks, be sure to check out the quantum weirdness of the Almost Kiss and Summer of Brave and the upcoming Leah and Beckett's Abracadabra. I'm Eshaan, signing off, and I'll see you in the next one. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Bye.